Okay. All right. Here we go. Give me just a sec. I just want to make sure that looks like it's up and running. All right. So sorry. Okay. So welcome back to another reading of Otto's Toy Factory. So sorry about missing Monday and Wednesday. I ended up trying to go back and rewrite some things, as well as some other things came up. I also have to update my computer a little bit, so yeah, I already got the website all fixed up and everything. So I'm gonna go ahead and start reading. All right. So Otto's Toy Factory, Chapter 22, Changing Seasons. The fall back to reality was quite hard for me. Everything was gloomy my first year home, and everything was gloomy. My first year home would have been okay if the people in town didn't accuse my father of being behind what happened. It started at my elementary school. One day, a kid who, for shits and giggles, asked me if my father was the serial killer. Um, I, of course, denied it, and I backed up my defense by giving the kid a bloody nose. My reaction somehow did the exact opposite, however, translating my simple no to a big fat yes, and the rumor only grew from there. Kids made up grossly exaggerated stories of something stalking the woods, and that something was my dad. My dad, to them, was a werewolf who ate children who wandered the woods, especially the park. Because of this, the park remained deserted. Not all adults believed in the lie, believed in it, but the lie still spread from the lips of the more gullible parents, infecting the whole town. Since the abductions started during our stay at our old town and then started after the arrival of our formerly quiet and crime free one, people couldn't help but tangle all the dots together into an absurd web of lies. Teens began vandalizing our house, thinking my father was a serial killer who worshipped the devil, possibly the most unusual rumor of all. Many troubled adolescents taunted my father, including the three teens that my friends and I accused earlier. Mothers of young children would often avoid my dad at school, the store, or in parking lots, thinking he was just a simple creep. Fellow fathers with their families would often confronted him almost every time we went out to do something. Dad would often hold his own, but half the time he was unable to do much. Most didn't physically attack him when I was there, so he couldn't really respond to the outside of words. But some seemed more than happy to kick his ass and run with me in tow. A few actually attempted, all failing because of the obvious circumstances. Police had to be called from Police had to be called from both sides and of the party many times. It got so bad for my dad that even local department provided little help. They never accused my father directly, but they still wondered if it was possible if he was the suspect they were looking for. The profilers reviewing the case suggested the criminal was middle aged, but they didn't rule out any younger ages. My father was in his mid 30s and not nearly as tall as the suspect described, but it was still possible to them, especially if he had an old van with stilts laying around in the wilderness somewhere. The perp was never found either. There was the staggering chance that they were dead, but the police may never know for sure. For all they knew, suspect's death could have been a cover for them to start fresh. Unfortunately, the repeated verbal beatings from locals weakened Dad's spirit to the point where he started to drink more and more. He struggled to keep his job, especially when the medical bills piled up. From there, the bank repoed our house. Dad and I had to move into a trailer park for the following 3 years. Dad barely paid the bills. I struggled with school, having trouble focusing because of my trauma and the distracting teases the other kids constantly stabbed at me. One night, two cops took my dad out in for questioning after pulling him over for driving drunk. The only part which was true. The small town public eye what used the fact that my dad was driving drunk with me in the car as an indication that he was hiding something. Police hounded my dad for hours, but he remained strong and stood by his story. He did not have anything to do with what happened with the nights leading up to or after my disappearance. The department had no choice but to cut him loose, but they still refused to leave him alone, even going as far as to spy on us during our outings. Everywhere we went, school, the park, even to the cemetery where I'd visit my fallen friends, there would always be a cop car parked down the street. A few times they actually had the gall to arrive at our front door to search our trailer. They would often say they heard a disturbance or saw something suspicious in the area as a cover. But my dad, but my dad, but dad was always good about seeing through the bullshit. He managed to chase them off the first couple of times until they returned with a warrant. They vigorously rummaged through our trailer, searching from top to bottom to find what anyone would suspect. Nothing. Nothing outside of empty beer bottles and a small bag of marijuana anyway. Unfortunately, Dad did have just enough marijuana to be put under arrest again for several days. I had to be put in a temporary foster home, housing the same little asshole who started the rumor. Finally, Dad's court appointed lawyer served the department a cease and desist letter threatening to sue the city for a price that would destroy them financially for decades to come if they didn't stop harassing us. That was more than enough to get the police off Dad's back. For a few months later, Dad had to go to court for possession, but because of the unrelenting harassment from the cops, the judge had to deliver a reduced felony charge. My father had to be on parole for a year, but at least he wasn't finished as a person. Even then, that did not extinguish the police suspicion; it only ignited them. They and the locals continued to watch my dad from afar until the day we finally moved. We finally moved by December 31st, 2001. By then, my dad's reputation in town was destroyed. No one wanted to have anything to do with us. Through our lean years, Dad managed to scrape just enough money together to relocate us to down the state to a much larger city in California, managing to find us a rent control, and he even managed to find us a rent control apartment in Midtown where we resided for another few years, for another 9 years. As I grew up, the memory of Otto, the town, and the tragedy of my friends had pretty much faded from my mind, but the trauma of it still managed to make a huge impact on my life. I was quiet, much quieter than I used to be, not out of shyness, but anger. Since Dad was no longer able to buy me toys without giving me a heart attack, he opted for art books. He, like many others, noticed my talent for drawing and decided to buy me mountains of sketchbooks, a suggestion brought to him by my therapist to help me channel my energy. We even adopted a dog. I named him Rocky. He was a 5-year-old golden retriever, and yet another suggestion by my therapist, a suggestion I actually liked. I'll admit that dog was my only friend for the first 2 years, until he died of cancer. We couldn't afford the health insurance to take care of him. I was still very hung up about what happened to me all those years ago. Though my soul retained the truth, this was when the years of therapy began to take hold. My original memories began to blur and become rationalized by my ever maturing mind. The overall story now seemed less supernatural, but the night's terrors never went away. After graduating middle school, my rebellious side took over. I skipped classes, barely paying attention to the ones that I did attend. This is where I also began my toxic relationship with alcohol, starting with hard lemonade at 13, graduating to whiskey and vodka by the time I was 15. I smoked an incredible amount of marijuana, and I did it often to numb myself alongside my usual medication. I did to try other drugs, but they left me sick and only worsened the memories, and I still struggled to bury. The pills that my therapist gave me stopped working on their own a long time ago. My prescription was changed many times, but still did little to subdue my PTSD or my schizophrenia. A few times in my drunken or drug induced state, I would confuse a random abandoned buildings for Otto's toy factory and vandalize them, even went as far to try and burn them down in some cases. My father had to pick me up from the police department several times throughout my years in high school. During my high school years, my bad reputation skyrocketed. Just about every student avoided me, not because they hated me, but because they were a little scared of me. I dyed my mousy brown hair jet black and wore dark colors and black clothes all the time. Being a stupid teenager, a lot of it was rebellion, leftover anger at how nobody considered my side of the story and still thought of me as a stupid kid. My experience caused me to lose trust in anyone. I barely trusted my father, let alone any other human. I felt betrayed by my father for him not believing in me and my experience, for taking the therapist's side despite all that had happened. But there was another purpose for it: camouflage. My clothes and new hair were was also a to distance My clothes and new hair was also to distance me from my past self, to prevent me from being recognized by Otto the bear if he ever returned into my life. Though I wasn't the biggest fan of it, as my negative reputation in school was also building, so was my nickname. Everybody started calling me Gara of the Desert whenever they saw me in class or on campus in general. Apparently, I had a very powerful resemblance to the anime character, with a few exceptions. I did not have the love kanji, and certainly not the red hair, and my eyes were green with pupils. But the excessive eyeliner, coupled with the fact that I barely slept at all, didn't help. Oh, but the excessive eyeliner I wore did not help, coupled with the fact that I barely slept at all. When I did, the nightmares were all I saw. The uh, the eyeliner was mostly to hide my insomnia from my dad. We both knew it didn't work, since I kept waking up every. We both knew it didn't work, since I kept waking up in the morning screaming like a kid trapped on Elm Street. I I went through a lot of energy drinks and sugar to stay awake and ward off my night terrors. At times, I nearly fell asleep in class, only to wake up with a start. Some assholes in class who noticed. Some assholes in class who noticed often joked how I nearly released the shikaku, whatever that means. People would poke and prod, not giving a rat's ass about the fact that I never saw the fucking show, and rudely informed anyone about. And I rudely informed everyone about a million times. But they knew to shut up instantly when they realized I heard them. I anyone who saw Anyone who looked at me funny, or had the balls to crack a joke immediately had to deal with an aggressive confrontation. My angry, quiet, and downright resentful demeanor had made some students wonder if I was planning to shoot up the school one day. I did buy weapons, but never guns. I preferred pocket knives, buying them often when I had the money. It helped for the occasional trips to the bathroom during class. Having a sharp, pointy object hidden up your sleeve can come in handy on the off chance you'd see a small something other than a squirrel or a person passing by. Thankfully, I never had to use them, but I was always armed on and off campus, just in case. I was always alone and didn't want to be around people in general. I always came off as angry or disturbed whenever someone was brave enough to approach me, inevitably adding to more to the comparison. I hated it, but it meant I was doing something right. You wouldn't recognize me if you saw me as a kid. Gone was the shy, happy bunny rabbit with the target on its back. Now stood a tall, thin, angry, stoic demon who looked ready to take down anything. It meant I wasn't the target anymore. My senses had sharpened to the point where I could hear a pin drop from the other side of the room and instantly react. It got me in trouble with teachers several times. People would try to sneak up on me to scare me whenever it was convenient, only to find it was almost impossible. My guard was constantly up. If they jumped me, I would just knock them down. Most girls wouldn't approach me out of fear, and the few who did simply wanted to. Most girls wouldn't approach me out of fear, and the few who did simply wanted me as their personal project and ended up leaving out of frustration. I wouldn't bend on anything. Always dead set on what I believed in. It had been that way since I was 8 years old. I was never sexually active, however. Again, you have to be willing to open up for that. Many people tried to talk, but I rarely ever answered back. Stay, staying quiet and drawing in my sketchbook. The subject of my artwork was always what the subject of my artwork never really changed. I only added to it. I started drawing other things, but the one subject always made a resurgence no matter what. Art class was the only class I actually did well in. Teachers loved all the detail I put in my work. Though those who noticed my drawings always commented how cool and detailed everything looked. Though though it was still not entirely perfect, I was able to insert detail where most people probably wouldn't notice. I could draw just about anything from still life to to my most common subject. I drew Otto the bear in my work as a stuffed comic book teddy bear. Not a giant, though, just an average sized teddy bear, reducing most of the details and textures I remember to simple shapes and lines. The finished project would look damn near professional each time. Ironically, though, I was never ironically though ironically enough, though I was never really popular, Otto the teddy bear became a sensation by my junior year of high school. Whenever my fellow peers saw his character drawn on paper or painted on walls around town, they knew I was the creator. Nobody in Sacramento knew my story. I never really told anyone. A few times I was asked where my inspiration for the character came from. When I told them what happened, their reactions ranged from pity to saying I made it up, or at least I made up parts of it. Teachers knew of it. It was part of my file when I started attending. I didn't care, of course. Despite the origin, everyone still loved the character and even asked for special requests when they saw my other works. Seeing an opportunity in it, I went ahead and started drawing for people. Characters, insignias, logos, landscapes, and whatever else. Because of how dark and depressing my artwork originally was, a lot of people always said it reflected Tim Burton a lot, especially my character art which included Otto. It was something I wasn't a fan of, but everyone loves a Nightmare Before Christmas and all his other movies, so I took the compliment. My hobby ended up being my saving grace in the end. The requests and praise from my fellow peers made me gradually warm up and start sharing my feelings again. Though my emotions were though my emotions were the most impactful through my drawings. It took me a while, but I managed to straighten up enough to barely graduate. My emo streak gradually faded away through my senior year and I started wearing brighter colors and allowed my hair dye to fade and stopped wearing eyeliner. Sorry, give me a second. Thought I heard something. Sorry about that, guys. Thought I heard something. Though it took a while longer, I did manage to fix my circadian rhythm by drinking chamomile tea and taking sleeping pills along with my usual medication. I started watching cartoons again to curb my lingering night terrors, often sleeping with the TV on and letting the sounds of and the brave words of comic book and anime heroes drive away the monsters in my subconscious. I quit drinking and attended a rehab center that to prevent me from falling into the habit, and eventually I quit smoking. Both actions really benefited my GPA. I wasn't as bad of a mood all the time, and I could focus better, making the subjects much easier to understand. I was looking more and more like my old self again. I even got a job at McDonald's and started to focus on school much, much more. However, the only subject that I continued to struggle with was physical education. My old injuries from that night made it difficult to keep up with the other students. But I did well enough to pass, and the teacher always kept this in mind whenever he delivered final grades. Not only did I excel in school, but my newfound knowledge in subjects helped me to add to my artwork and help expand my creativity. Everyone loved my artwork before, and then they went absolutely insane once I expanded my horizon. I began using different styles and drew more fluid poses, moving from dark and twisted realism to using brighter colored illustrations and comedic comic shorts starring my old bear character. I never lost the realism. Instead, I assimilated it into my and villain designs. Some of the few friends I managed to make even said what I drew could make for an awesome comic book series. I knew that it was going to I knew what I was going to be by that time. It was the undying comments and encouraging from my fellow peers to create a new character a few months before I graduated. This new character was based on myself and who easily surpassed my bear in popularity. His name was Iribofuyumi, a highly intelligent and gifted rogue samurai rabbit chosen to end the reign of Hiroto Okuma, a tyrannical bear emperor and source of all evil currently ruling the realm. No one dares to challenge Hiroto but Iri, who foolishly befriended the emperor and helped him attain his status. Once his status was secured, Hiroto betrayed Iri by having a small group of loyal half-human, half-steampunk ninjas to kill Iri in his sleep. Not counting on his incredible sense of hearing and gift with the sword. Injured but still alive, Iri was forced to flee and left to wander the world, committing good deeds to hopefully redeem his honor and eventually gain courage to overthrow Hiroto and save the world. It was heavily anime inspired, but my overall idea to combine the many different cultures into one, adding some Samurai Jack style storytelling. Everyone loved Iri and the story I wrote. Iri helped me get Iri helped get me out of my depression for good and start focusing on a newer, brighter future. My th- my thanks was my goal to make Iri a reality one day. After graduation, I remained at McDonald's for another year until I had just enough money to afford college. When I Then I enrolled to community college to take my grades. Then I enrolled to the first community college that who could take my grades and moved out of Sacramento, visiting my father once I opened up about what happened. Now, visiting my father once a month to check in. We'd go out to eat or just stay in the house and talk. It was during our talks when I finally opened up about what happened. He listened to my story much better and much better this time. He still didn't move his on his stance on the exotic parts, but he was much more considerate of my feelings. I guess because I was much older now and less compelled to throw a tantrum whenever he said otherwise. We discussed what happened, and I buried the hatchet with Otto the bear and his hellish toy factory, accepting the fact that he could not have been what I thought he was after all. I remembered everything my father and therapist told me, re-asking the questions they gave me, and I answered all of them myself. It was all impossible. A 13-foot tall bear could never get around without being seen. It would make too much noise. A car as old and damaged as I described wouldn't drive, and a bear certainly cannot be the one to drive it. Not They don't have thumbs, and even if they could fit. There are abandoned cities in and around California, but chances are Thomasville is not one of them. I even went as far as to research online, and like the detectives all those years ago, I found no record of a town by that name. I was wrong. What I went through was real, just not in the way I always thought. I was tricked and lulled into a false sense of security by a monster, just a metaphorical monster. Once I came to terms with this after all these years of denial, I began to wonder, are humans really the monsters to fear? Give me just a second. I'm just trying to. Okay, obviously, there's still a bunch of run on sentences and everything, but for right now, I want to just finish this. So, here, I'm going to read the next chapter now. And then I can always go back and fix things in the future. Alright, so give me just a second, guys. I just want to walk away. Just a sec. I just want to get a drink of water. So I know I sound like a mean guy. Okay. Here we go. Chapter 23. Otto's Toy Factory, Chapter 23. The Return. After graduating community college, I moved back to the city and transferred to a university majoring in art, and it was during my freshman year when I met the love of my life, Sonia Flores. Sonia was from Jamestown and new to the city. I remember how she approached me to ask for help finding her class. I remember how she approached me to ask for help finding her classroom. Our meeting was like a scene from a movie, slow motion and everything. She walked up to me with a golden smile and bright, loving hazel eyes. When I saw when I saw her standing before me, she looked like an angel flying against the baby blue sky. The hot sun highlighted her raven black hair and sunflower dress, making them shimmer like gold. She and I hit it off, and it wasn't long before we had a sexual relationship. Sonia was your token tomboy who liked movies, going out and cuddling up with me. She was great. She was a great cook and was very mature, never interested in partying. Her idea of a fun was a night. Her idea of a fun night was Netflix. Sonia reminded me so much of Stephanie, and she even had a strong resemblance, except she was Latino. I could even remember I remember accidentally mentioning this to her on her third date, but she wasn't offended. It was then I told her about of my run-in with Otto the bear and his toy factory. Sonia listened, and by the end, she was shocked, upset, and angry for me. She was shocked, upset, and angry for me. She was the one crying, and I actually had to console her. Of course, she didn't seem to agree that it was the a. She did seem to agree that it was a demented person and not a literal monster who took me. But she never did. But she never said she didn't believe me or believe the eight. But she never said she didn't believe the 8-year-old in me. There have been moments where I thought my story reminded her of something, but she never told me, and I never asked. A few weeks later, it was when I introduced her to my father. A few weeks after that was when I introduced her to my father. Sonia and I moved in together in the summer. In the sum, Sonia and I moved in together in the summer, well into our relationship, and we began supporting each other. She was even helping me to pay to get my degree, and was helping and I was helping her transfer to UC Davis Medical School, where she was majoring as a nurse. Sonia got the bug when her mother was rescued one day after falling down. Sonia got the bug when her mother was rescued one day after falling down from a stroke when she was 18. She realized she had a talent for medicine by helping her disabled mother and wanted to turn it into a career. Before then, she knew what she wanted to do with her life. Before then, she never knew that's what she wanted to do with her life. Though it was unexpected, but it was during our final year of college, we were blessed by the birth of our daughter, Zoe. By then, we managed to move into a small, well-furnished apartment in Fair Oaks. It was a struggle balancing work, college, and having a newborn child, but we were happy, and our daughter was worth it. Zoe was a perfect combination of me and Sonia, with double the sweetness. She had my powder blue eyes and my facial expression. Yeah, she had my powder blue eyes and my facial expressions while also having her mother's raven black hair and nose. What a sweetheart she was. So selfish, so selfless and loving. Like so many other little girls, Zoe liked to play dress up and have tea parties with her stuffed animals. Her favorite toy was always sitting right next to her, a congenial collection doll she named Amber, with curly blonde hair and blue eyes, wearing a beautiful scarlet red dress and with a black bow tied around its waist. For 5 wonderful years, the four of us were happy until things started getting weird. For the last few months, Zoe had been talking to an imaginary friend who she claimed visited her outside her bedroom window at night. She wouldn't tell me who it was, only that they were a big, friendly cartoon animal who liked to play with her. We still lived in our apartment in Fair Oak, so it wasn't a neighbor, and Zoe can't have internet access on her own. So I assumed she had an imaginary friend. Every child gets one at some point, and Zoe was the right age to start having one. I even saw her draw a couple of pictures of them and show them to me. Of course, they were simple stick figures with big brown circles colored in to represent a big animal bear. Though I managed to though I managed to revive my love of cartoons, my memory of what happened was long gone, replaced by years of logic and reason. So, being a typical logical parent, I dismissed Zoe's unusual behavior as my daughter just going through a phase. This this was around that time my dad. It was around that time my dad disappeared. Dad decided Dad decided to spend a hot summer day at Folsom Lake and try his hand at fishing. Since he was closing in on retirement, he was thinking of developing some hobbies for the long hours at home. Though I insisted in though I insisted in this economy he would still needed a part-time job. He ins- Job just to get by. He insisted on retiring fully in a year or two. When he set off that one when he set off one day and returned when he set off that one day turned into two, then three. Search parties were only able to find Dad's truck, located just a mile from his chosen destination. It was found off-road and bashed into bits by trees and rocks. It appeared to have been tumbled down an incline after being run off the road somehow. Detectives theorized that some Detectives theorized from the number of skid marks on the road that he must have gotten into a collision on his way there. This theory was supported by witnesses who heard tires screeching in the area. Being incredibly drunk, of the unusual most partiers thought nothing of the unusual noise other than as stuff that likes that as stuff like that tends to happen. Most partiers thought nothing of the noise as stuff like that tends to happen. But as the investigation continued, there was more evidence suggesting a large predator must have been in the area as well. Weeks passed as rangers scanned the area, uncovering evidence that suggests my father was attacked by something big shortly after exiting his vehicle. Cops speculated that my father ran into another car, which forced him to swerve and tumble off the road. The driver who hit him must have sped away, possibly drunk and scared of being caught. Despite his injuries, which may have been severe, my father left his vehicle to find help, only to be attacked and possibly eaten by something. Scratch marks on the tree trunks, as well as paw prints in the soil, paw prints located in the soil, located further down the incline, suggested to them that my father was a target of a rather large bear, possibly a grizzly or a brown bear. The bear must have smelled Dad's blood and followed him through the woods before taking him down. But the true California grizzly has been extinct for over 100 years, and no zoos have reported an animal escaping. Rangers who suggested the idea were surprised too, noting how highly unlikely a bear was in the area. But it was impossible. But it wasn't impossible either, as predator populations have been rising gradually. If not a bear, it could have been a large dog or even a pack. Either way, as a precaution, officials closed Folsom Lake for the rest of the summer until they could locate and euthanize the animals responsible. An animal which was never located. The case was open and shut. Though there wasn't a body, my father was presumed dead. His body possibly lost to animal predation. It was upsetting for everybody, especially for me and Zoe. Zoe loved her grandpa. I didn't tell her what really happened, just that grandpa was in an accident and went to heaven. I planned to tell her the truth when she was old enough to better understand life and death. Zoe was sad, but she wasn't too worried. I think she still had an idea of what was going on through the eavesdropping of conversations I've had with the police. As she never really acknowledged her grandpa was dead. If she overheard the word missing, that must mean that they could still be alive. Holding on to this belief, Zoe reassured me. Don't worry, Daddy. Grandpa will be okay. I'll tell my friend. He may know where he is. He could help us find him. She hugged my side as Sonia and I held each other. We were blown away at how sweet she could be. After a while, we decided to let things go, hoping one day authorities would find my father, but in harsh wilderness that can be difficult. Even with the civilization nearby, a person can go missing in the woods as quickly as they step in. It was sad having lost both my parents, but I could only think of the best. Mom and dad were reunited in the afterlife, and I could be with them too one day. I still had my character Erie, who was well on his way to being a comic series, and I was still lucky enough to have a wonderful, loving family who supported me through thick and thin. I felt more complete then than any other point in my life. I couldn't wait until Zoe grew up to watch Zoe grow up and have a much happier life than mine. So mine as a child. Sonia was my light through the darkness. Sonia was my light through the darkness, and Zoe was our star until Zoe went missing. It happened the following fall, on September 12th, Zoe's fifth birthday. Sonia and I just finished watching. Sonia and I just finished watching her open up her presents at home and opted to take her out to the park. It was a cool autumn afternoon. It was a cool autumn afternoon. The trees were just beginning to change in color. The air was crisp with an underlying chill with the smell of rain due to come later in the week. Though I give me a second. Oh, my water. It happened the following fall. On September 12th, Zoe's fifth birthday, Sonia and I just finished watching her open presents at home when we opted to take her out to the park. It was a cool autumn afternoon. The trees were just beginning to change in color. The air was crisp with an underlying chill and a smell of rain due to come later in the week. Though though I had already graduated, Sonia had still needed to make up for the time lost when she had Zoe. So she was still in college and had her final midterm due the following morning. She decided to bring her textbook and study, and I brought my newest sketchbook to draw some more character poses while Zoe went to play. The three of us were the only ones there at the park, so we didn't mind when she wandered off a short distance. She ran with Amber to the swing sets while Sonia practiced her test questions. The last time we saw Zoe, she was heading for the tree line to looking for something. I didn't see anything come out or hear her scream. So I kept an so I kept an eye on her for only so I took an eye off her for only a minute before turning back to I kept an eye on her for only a minute before turning back to Sonia to see how she was doing. But when we looked back, Zoe was gone. Sonia and I called with no sign of her anywhere. That was when we heard the engine of an ancient vehicle speeding off. We never saw the car or where it went. Police searched and searched for days, even weeks, but they found nothing. Sonia and I were torn apart. As the months passed, we began to dissolve. We began to fight over who was responsible for losing her. Eventually, I ended up moving out. After a vigorous overnight driving, I found myself in a shitty roach infested motel in the outskirts of town, where I would reside from then on. Every day I prayed for my daughter's safe return, numbing the pain with alcohol. I lost all interest in drawing and cartoons. My sketchbooks laid in the back of my closet in boxes, collecting dust. Erie was no longer a source of strength for me. I was finally broken. A few weeks into my stay, I received news from Sonia's father that Sonia committed suicide. Nobody knew what actually happened. At first, it was thought that she did it because of her deep depression. At first, at first she was doing fine, taking it day by day. But then her father said something happened. She received a call from He received a call from her saying, "Mom, Dad, he's back. He took her, and he's gonna take me too." Despite her parents' pleas to stay on the line, Sonia hung up. Her father explained how he heard something in the background just before she did. It sounded like someone was at her door, knocking and yelling really loud. They found Sonia in her bedroom. Medics had to break down the door as she had it blocked her side. She had it blocked with the bed at her side. She was not. She was tucked into a corner at the other side of the bedroom. She had taken a bottle of sleeping pills and washed them down as quickly as she could with the wine she bought for herself. It seemed someone was able to enter her apartment, but were too late to get her. Cops assumed it was the same psycho who took our daughter. I was so heartbroken and angry. I wanted to kill the motherfucker who did this to us, and I wanted to make it as slow and painful as possible. At first, Sonia's parents accused me until I told them how I hadn't seen her at all since we split up. He didn't. Her father didn't believe me and sent the cops to get me. They, of course, let me go when they learned of my alibi. drinking my consciousness away at a shitty bar local at a shitty bar local bar. They of course let me go when they learned of my alibi, drinking my consciousness away at a shitty local bar called Owl's for hours until the night she vanished. It was then I was informed Sonia had a stalker when she was a teenager. Sonia wasn't even her real name either. It was Melanie. Melanie Rodriguez. She and her family used to live in Lovelock, Nevada, where they were from, but the Rodriguez family had to change names and relocate because of someone Sonia Melanie met on MySpace. They never knew the culprit's real name, just his profile. 6 Tax B66. Apparently, Melanie and this guy exchanged emails, texted, and even spoke on the phone a few times. Melanie found this person charming and thought nothing of it when she started getting texts and even gifts from him, mostly toys. Melanie also had an embarrassing teen phase, the queen bee, polar opposite of the person I knew. She was everything you'd expect from a 2000 stereotype, frenemy to the unpopular, wearing skin tight and revealing clothes and often posted selfies. Melanie was, of course, the popular girl with an attractive body and no fear of showing it off. Nothing too exotic, but still nothing a minor should ever post online. She loved partying and getting into trouble most of all. The rebellious type who saw her traditional loving and protective parents as lame and prude. Because of their constant protests. Melanie did have a small emo streak, like me. She was a huge fan of Nightmare Before Christmas, along with a small taste for other macabre subjects. Things she often things she often suppressed from her obnoxious followers. So the occasional creepy homemade figurines her stalker placed on her in her locker and mailbox were awesome to her. Melanie never gave 6 Taxby 66 their address or questioned how the guy even knew where she went to school or where she lived at all. From her perspective, Melanie assumed her stalker was a secret admirer and fellow peer. She was even secretly hoping her admirer was the high school basketball star Tony Ryan, a talented kid she thought was the one for her at the time. But he confirmed later that he wasn't the one sending them. The relationship between Melanie and Tax B66 didn't really come off as much of a relationship from a third party perspective. The guy never asked for any photos or anything sexual in nature. The conversations on her phone and computer were harmless threads talking about what Melanie secretly liked, what she was going through emotionally, and how unfair she thought her parents were, which was how she managed to get away with it for nearly a year. Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez, as expected, did not like the guy and the relationship he supposedly had with their only daughter. Something about this person just rubbed them the wrong way, causing alarm bells to shriek considerably in their heads. They just knew there was something off, but they didn't really have any proof. The two of them eventually planned to meet in person. When Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez found out, they grounded Melanie and took her phone away. She also wasn't allowed to use the family car till she literally graduated high school, which was over a year away, if at all possible at the time. And they installed expensive and incredibly strict parental controls on her computer. However, none of this discouraged Melanie. She snuck out sometime later in the evening, and after having a huge fight with her parents about it. Never planning to return, she never planned to return, but she did come home 1 week later. She was found just a few miles outside of Reno, torn up, traumatized, and half dead from exposure. Melanie wouldn't share much of what happened to her parents or police, but she was happy to be home and more grateful than ever. Police never found her stalker. As soon as they could, the Rodriguez family uprooted and came straight to California, settling in Jamestown. Melanie flew straight ever since. It seemed after all those years, 6 Tax B-66 found her. From there, investigators believed she called her parents for help in a panic, but the situation worsened. She made her way to the back of the house and barricaded herself in with the bed. To ensure her stalker could never get to her, knocked back the pills and wine. Going off the convenience of the substances, police believe that she may have been planning suicide to begin with. The return of her stalker may have been what sent her completely over the edge. Evidence in her Gmail suggested that her stalker had been writing to her again. The letters weren't really threatening, but they were disturbing, suggesting how it had been a long time since they'd seen each other, and how they would like to meet again. Eventually, the perv found our apartment and tried to get in. When they found Melanie, she had her gaze focused on our favorite family picture. It was a picture of us and Zoe at the state fair. Zoe was 4 at the time. She had a mouthful of cotton candy and she rested on my shoulders. I was struggling to stop her by moving. I was struggling to stop her by moving the bag out of. I was holding popcorn. Zoe actually was trying to reach out to grab some. I was struggling to stop her by moving the bag out of her reach, but Zoe still managed to get it. I couldn't help but giggle. Her mother was holding up the camera on the phone. Her mother was holding up the camera phone in one hand, an all-American corn dog in the other, with a big California smile spread across her face. In the background were random happy people with plenty of concession stands and junk food, games with prizes. We had that picture printed professionally and framed it to see in our bedroom forever. I guess Sonia, wanted to feel some kind of happiness when she left. I didn't care about what her name was or her past. I just wanted my Sonia back. But I knew it couldn't happen. What we had was gone, and now she was gone too. Officials let me have most of Sonia and Zoe's possessions, mostly pictures, cheap jewelry, and some boxes containing Zoe's favorite toys and her music box. I looked through them almost every day, reminiscing about happier times, hoping to one day have them again. Most everything else went to my in-laws. We stopped contacting each other after that. I don't know why they called me. I don't know why, but they called me throughout the process and we made arrangements, but after the funeral, they just stopped calling me. I figured it was because they were still mourning, so I didn't think anything of it for the first few weeks. Until I tried to call back, only to get their voicemails. Then once I filled their mailboxes, nothing. I was so upset at this fact. They told me they would be available to talk, but they refused to answer their phones. I suspected it was because of Mr. Flores, or should I say Rodriguez. He never did like me. Mr. Rodriguez was a very traditional man, very proud of his heritage, and preferred his daughter to marry a fellow Latino instead of a white man. He made it pretty clear the first night I met him. That night, Sonia, her parents, and I went out to a nice steak restaurant. He was disappointed at the sight of me. I could literally see it on his face as it went from a bright, beaming sunlight smile to a almost deadpan, dead-eyed scowl when he first laid eyes on me. His passive-aggressive grunts and mannerisms at the dinner table didn't help either. He was far from subtle. I stomached it for Sonia's sake, and her father pretty much. I summoned it for Sonia's sake, and her father pretty much backed off when Zoe was born. I guess the both of them were. I guess since the both of them were gone, my in-laws had the perfect excuse to cut me out of their life. I wouldn't be shocked if they blamed me for all of it. I blame myself too. Since they didn't want to talk to me, I didn't want to talk to them. I blocked their numbers and they were ready. I blocked their numbers until they were ready to stop giving me this silent treatment. I didn't want to lose their numbers completely, however, in case Zoe came home. I didn't want her losing contact with the only grandparents she had left. I still wanted to maintain some sort of hope that throughout this whole experience. I could do nothing anymore but think of Zoe. Sonia's stalker was still out there, possibly with Zoe. Zoe was still alive. I prayed that it would be the I prayed that it would be the case. Just so that way there would be some pieces to pick up, a chance to have a future with my daughter. It was too late for me and Sonia, but I hoped it wasn't too late for my daughter to come home and lead a happy life, one I never really had. And the only reason I didn't take my own life was because I wanted my daughter, if she was alive, to have somebody to come home to. For now, that'll be it. As you can see, it's still kind of chopped up, but yeah, it's still pretty chopped up. But I am editing it. I'm actually very close to the end now. So after I finally get it all out there, I'll go back to part 2 at the very least and start re-editing some things. So that'll be it for now. That was chapters 22 and 23. And hope you guys have a good day. This is Scorpius. And I'll have my contact info all linked up. And I also have more contact info on Otto's Toy Factory.com as well. Thank you.